Hi friends, welcome to this latest podcast of the Nationalist View. We have with us Colonel Miri. Colonel Eisen, thank you so much for taking time out. Especially, Colonel Eisen is based in Israel, and we know what Israel is going through right now. So there has been a perpetual attack from of missiles from Iran, not only on the military installation but also on the civilian installation. So they are doing it randomly. Fortunately, the damage has not been much because of the Israeli defense mechanisms, their Iron Dome, and the earlier preparations. But let's keep our fingers crossed. So I'll just give a brief introduction of Colonel Miri Aisin, and then we'll get on with the conversation. So Colonel Aisin is a retired colonel of the Israeli Defense Forces with a background in intelligence, security, and diplomacy. She's a frequent commentator on these issues in global media. She was also an international press secretary to Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. And she was also the Israeli government spokesperson during the Second Lebanon War in 2006. Colonel Eisen is also a senior fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Rittman University in Israel. Colonel Eisen, my first question is that from Israel's perspective, so there's a lot of talk about, the bombs and the missiles and the bunkers, but let's look at the strategic objectives. So, from Israel's perspective, what are the ultimate strategic objectives in this conflict with Iran, particularly regarding its nuclear program and regional proxies like Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas? And then later on, we'll also come to the question on the multi-front war which you are fighting, because the war against Hamas is still going on in Gaza. But let's look at the first question first. Yeah.
What Israel achieved in both the opening strike on June 13th and then in the last 12, almost 13 days, is through air superiority. So when I say what was our target, to be able to achieve the target, we needed to achieve air superiority. That means that Israeli aircraft, different types, have had free access to Iran for the last 13 days. That's quite amazing. Through that air superiority, and that is a consistent target that you have to make sure that is constantly subdued, we attacked the following types of targets. Nuclear facilities, and then you had the US attack on 3, but there are many more facilities. We attacked and targeted the different people, commanders, what we call in military terms, command and control of 3 different elements of air and space, which means missiles and drones, and nuclear. All 3 of these command and control are all within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which means that we have targeted and continue to do so the entire time very effectively the air defense, the nuclear sites, but also the commanders that were the ones who give the descriptions, the ones who are doing the development, the one who are looking long term, and the ones who hit the trigger. And we take out, yes, they appointed new people, but having done so through that air superiority, Israel could do so again. The other targets that we attacked and continue to do so until today are mainly the missiles and drones that were incoming into Israel. And when you talk about the targets also, in that sense, looking at the proxies, not only the arsenals of weapons that the Islamic regime developed and manufactured for itself, we went after those arsenals, after those bases all over Iran. We also targeted the manufacturing facilities. Why is that so important? That's where you make them and then you export them, give them to your proxies. So Israel has achieved destroying not all, but in such a significant way, the manufacturing facilities so you can't supply the proxies. The R&D, the research and development, the different commanders, the commanders that were responsible for being the go-to person between the Islamic regime, Persian-speaking Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and between the different proxies, specifically with Hezbollah and with the Hamas and with the Houthis. Those are very important elements. And we still have that air superiority. Even now, with a tentative ceasefire, Israel maintains that. Last, not least, is the nuclear. The nuclear Israel attacked, I cannot say destroyed, but certainly degraded lots of different sites. The United States, have they put it that they've destroyed 3 main sites? We always have to be a little tentative in the result, but what that means overall is that in the last 13 days, we have degraded or destroyed nuclear, missile, drone, command and control, and air defense. And I emphasize the air defense, Arun, because if we want to continue to attack, it's a tentative ceasefire, we have air superiority, and we continue to have that. So these are all very important achievements. They change the way we look at the Middle East. They change that sense that the Islamic regime is invincible, that it can use its proxies to defend itself, or that it can even defend itself. All of these have been broken.
So how do you look at the escalation ladder, both in terms of the ongoing conflict with Iran? Do you see a possibility of this escalation ladder, on this escalation ladder, Iran coming down on this escalation ladder because its defense capabilities have been significantly degraded, as you rightly mentioned. And also the
So,
escalation ladder as far as the proxies are concerned, because you still have an ongoing war in Gaza against Hamas. And then, of course, Houthis and Hezbollah, of course, you have degraded quite a lot. Hamas also, but there's still a war which is going on. So, how do you look at this, the escalation ladder? Because these escalation ladders are interconnected also.
right now, the Islamic regime officially announced that they accept a ceasefire. Right now, the government of Israel, the government, not yet the prime minister himself, but it's the government, have officially said that we accept a ceasefire. So the possibility after these 13 days of there being a renewal of fire is always there. How can that happen? It can happen, A, if the Islamic regime says they can do something through their proxies. It isn't, there's a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Now's the time for Hezbollah or the Houthis or the Shiites in Iraq, let alone Hamas, to open a front against Israel to show that they're still in the war. That equation has changed, I would say, and that's to continue the issue of the proxies, that equation of Iran fighting through the proxies and Iran being defended through the proxies was changed already last year at the end of 2024 when Israel so heavily degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. You and I spoke, we didn't know what that meant. Doesn't mean that Hezbollah is really different. Arun, I can say after 13 days of Israel having air superiority over Iran, of attacking every site that we targeted, that we wanted to in Iran, Hezbollah did absolutely nothing. There's a lot of words, they talk, but they did physically nothing, meaning we degraded them, and I don't think that they're holding their weapons for the worst case scenario. Why do I say that? Because for Hezbollah and for Iran, this is the worst case scenario. The nuclear sites have been attacked. The absolute exposure of Iran's incapability to defend itself, its incapability to have its proxies act when they wanted them to act, that shows how effective we've been. It's different with Hamas. Hamas is not an absolute Iranian proxy. They share their wish to eradicate Israel. They share the actions and a lot of the rhetoric calling for our annihilation. But Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, it's not an independent state. It's very isolated. So I think that right now is a big stage of what Israel will do. We still have a lot of fighting forces against Hamas on the Gaza Strip, and Hamas still hold 50 hostages, of them hopefully 20 alive, And so it's a different stage on what they're going to do right now. Does this impact them? Absolutely. What will they do? It's hard to say.
In wake of this ceasefire announcement, so I was just reading a few minutes ago, the Israeli Defense Forces. So they have issued a very cryptic remark that in an official statement, in which they have said that the danger persists, quote unquote, despite, the ceasefire with Iran. So how do you interpret this statement?
I'm sitting right now in my house. I have not been sleeping in my house since the war, the campaign against Iran started. Why? Because what Iran could fire against us, and they did, is very devastating. We intercepted 90%, 10% got through, and the devastation is very strong. They have warheads of 1,000, 1,500, 3,000 kilograms, and they fire them. It isn't just the impact in what they hit, and they hit residential areas all over Israel. It's also the impact in the afterblast, which flattens areas. And that has happened in Israel. We're not taking chances right now. We just had this morning an attack, just this morning, very early, that in Israel, it's known it's that last attack right before the ceasefire because Iran wants to be able to say, see, we had capabilities to the end. We're the ones who define the definition of what's going to happen. That's the Islamic regime, or for that matter, Hamas. That's their rhetoric. That is not their action. They fire cowardly against civilian targets wherever they could, however they could. And I say that right now, it's very tricky. What if you have somebody in the Islamic regime who decides to do, just one more? You need to be very careful. It's a very, very fragile time. And in Israel, we have a lot of experience with that. Meaning right at the stage that you get to a ceasefire, this is with Hamas, it was in the Gaza Strip, short-range rockets, but that includes mortars, and people were killed in those immediate aftermath where one side thought it wasn't yet. I don't want that exchange of fire to happen, but that's why you need to be careful right now. And so they're telling us it's still not open. We're still near safe rooms. If while I'm talking to you, there is an alert, I have to walk 4 minutes from my house. We get 5 to 7 minutes before the siren. That's the distance of the missiles from Iran to Israel. I'm smiling because I'm military and I understand that. But my understanding also told me that at nighttime, when there's an early alert at 3 a.m., to get up, to go downstairs, to walk to the shelter, that's a little tough. So I slept in a place where the shelter was very nearby.
Uh, Colonel Ison, uh, in our earlier conversation, if you remember that we had talked, when the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. So when that happened, and after that, the ceasefire was broken. And I remember having this conversation with you, and a number of other experts also pointed out that Hamas actually took this time period of ceasefire, which the window which it got because of the ceasefire, kind of to re-prepare itself, to prepare itself again for the next round of basically conflict. So the trust factor is there. Now with Iran also, because in this 12 to 13 days war, so the way Israel and US, they pummeled basically the Israeli Defense Forces, and there was a growing discontent and a lot of rumblings within Iran also, and the possibility of a regime change from within was also becoming it was becoming a distinct possibility. I won't say that it was going to happen immediately, but it was becoming. So, don't you think that this ceasefire, how do you assess, this trust factor not being there with, the Islamic forces? There's a pattern of Islamic forces, It has happened in
Yes.
India also. Like when we hosted Pervez Musharraf, then something happened, then Kargil happened, and then we have seen now, after a democratic government came there. So overall, there's a pattern of the Islamic forces that when they are down and out, they go for ceasefire, they take this opportunity, to re-prepare themselves and relaunch. Because I also remember you said a very fundamental thing which you had pointed out, that it's a war not against, I would say, even a state or a military or this thing in context of Hamas, which is true for Iran also. It is a war against ideology. So you are never going to, finish off. It's going to happen again and again. So how do you look at this, scenario uh, in context of things which I mentioned?
The main point, as you're putting that through for me, is that we haven't changed anybody's ideology. But what we've done is we've targeted and attacked very severe threats that have existed for 20, for 30, for 40 years, where they have talked and threatened. And it's a different world after Israel exposed how unequipped they are to actually fulfill those threats. And I say that because my heart goes out to the 30 people killed in Israel over the last 13 days by Iran. My heart goes out to the thousands in that sense in Israel, the first initially on October 7th and afterwards, both up north, but especially down south in Israel. But let's separate. I can't change the ideology, but I can expose both their lack of capability and their lies. Because if the Islamic regime cannot resupply its proxies, we've changed the world. And we have done something very significant there. We've exposed what they do, and the proxies are desperate. They still have the ideology to rebuild themselves militarily with the terror capabilities, and they can't. Now, at the end, the question that you're asking is such a fundamental one. How do we change the ideology? And that's something that each and every one of us needs to ask. My main question is not on Muslims. This is not about the heart of Muslims. 20% of Israeli citizens are Muslims. This isn't about Islam. This is about an extreme ideology that puts at the top the annihilation of the state of Israel. That the miscalculation of the ideology of these extreme Islamic forces, in Hamas is Sunni, and the Islamic regime of Iran is Shiite. So it's not the exact same, but they meet on that point, that what will make their Islamic world only better is if we're annihilated. On that one, we need to work hard, because the only success of Hamas, to me, not of Iran, but of Hamas in the last 20 months, has been the outbreak worldwide of everybody viewing Israel as being the bad guy in this conflict. And it's something we need to work hard at, because there's no question that the conflict is a horrible one. It's been absolutely horrible for people. So to your question, how do you change ideologies? To me, there's only one answer: education. But when you educate people to hate, they hate. When you educate people that other people are not human, then they think that we're not human. And I don't know how to change that. Iran was the one, Arun, that hosted since the beginning of the Islamic regime. They started this in the 1980s. That's over 40 some years ago. They've hosted an annual Holocaust denial conference, that there wasn't really a Holocaust. It's something that the Jews made up. It's the worst, heinous crime you can think of. And that's the Islamic regime of Iran. And I say, so I don't know how to change the ideology. What we've tried to do is to show and expose. It's first to degrade and destroy, but it's also to show and expose that horrific ideology that is so barbaric to its own people who oppose them is something that everybody should oppose. And here I call out anybody who feels sorry for Iran. The Islamic regime, immediately after June 13th in the morning, is trying to pose itself as the victim, which is exactly what Hamas did on October 7th. The exact same thing. Don't let it go down that path. That is not, it's a country of 86 million people. It has an incredibly strong education system, university system, military hardware. And you know what they did with it? They built missiles, drones, and nuclear capabilities, and to hate us.
One basic question emerges because this conflict was, I would say, a turning point in the Middle East. Do you see a realignment of, forces in Middle East in the long run because of this conflict, and especially, now uh, but because Turkey, which is a contender of which competes with Iran, or which is a rival of Iran. So out of this whole situation, by default, Turkey emerges out as a relatively, kind of a stronger force, stronger Islamic force. So the weakening of Iran could be strengthening of, Turkey. So this is just one example which I'm sharing from my perspective. So how do you see this? It's a complex dynamic in Middle East. So how do you see this? If you can give us just a broad indication, do you see that there's a possibility of realignment of forces? And how is, from Israel's perspective, how do you look at it?
The realignment of forces in the Middle East started after October 7th. We already then saw that the fact that the Shiite crescent, in that sense, Iran, the Shiites in Iraq, Houthis, Hezbollah, and Bashar Syria were all the ones who were very much supportive of Hamas's attack, and we didn't hear those kind of voices by the other Sunni countries. The Sunni countries, and in a moment I'll talk about Turkey, the Sunni countries very much are standing up for a different voice. And I say, not in hesitation, but I can understand how hard it is for any Sunni in the world to see what has happened to the Gaza Strip. That war there is horrible. As I've said many, many times, my heart goes out and I wish there was some other way to do it. But the way that Hamas planned the war, enacted the war, took the hostages, and built themselves within this as part of the civilian community makes it very challenging. So now we're at a stage where it's not just Hezbollah that has been so degraded, Syria that has completely changed over the last 7 months since Bashar al-Assad was ousted. Now it's also the exposure that Islamic regime, that head ideology, the one that was saying we're the ones leading what? And here I get to that new realignment. Because Turkey has a loud voice, and there's no question that Iran and Turkey are the two big populated powers in the Middle East. But let's remind everybody, Turkey is Turkish, not Arabic. Iran is mainly Persian, not Arabic. So when we talk about that new realignment, it isn't that suddenly Turkey is going to lead the Middle East. The Arabic-speaking countries of the Middle East do not want Turkey to lead them, just like they did not want the Shiite revolution of Iran and Persian to lead them. So they are equally not the ones that are necessarily going to do so. So I hear Erdogan's very strong voice. He certainly wants to come out as a voice protective of Sunnis, protective of the Palestinians, protective, for that matter, of what he's going to call Jerusalem, Al-Quds, or Al-Aqsa. I hear all of that. But that doesn't mean that all of those who were just in Istanbul over the last few days at a meeting of Muslim countries are all following that voice, meaning they don't all have the same ideas. I think that the big question right now is what Saudi Arabia will do, how Saudi Arabia will connect with Egypt, because at the end, Egypt demographically is by far the largest Arabic country. And it's larger than Iran or Turkey. Iran is around 86 million. Turkey is over 90 million. Egypt is 110 million. Arabic speaking, mainly Sunni Muslims with a Christian smaller minority, Arabic speaking Egyptian. And so the question is both with Egypt, but Egypt is not an economic power. Egypt is a very poor country. So the new realignment, I'm looking at the new voices. And I'm going to say clearly that I think that there is a new Middle East, and it's happening as we speak. And it's going to include Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, and it'll include probably Egypt. And the question here is what happens to Syria, this new version of the Syrian regime? What happens to Jordan that's in between all of these? So I gave a lot of different countries. I haven't mentioned them all. I am worried about the Turkish version, but from where I sit, that Turkish version is not one that the leaderships inside the Arabic-speaking countries want. And the last point I'm going to say is that the leadership of the Arabic-speaking countries, and here I'm including Syria and Iraq, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, just, Jordan and Egypt, all of them are vehemently against the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas's Muslim Brotherhood, a version of. The new Syrian regime, it's hard to tell. So I'm just saying there that I am more worried about a Muslim Brotherhood version that can go all the way to being like the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's local, it's in the country, it's in the language. And what as I say, in that new realignment, I want to hope that, again, the more moderate voices, the ones that don't put Israel as the problem, we're the problem of the world. I'm like, really? You just erase Israel and all of the world is all wonderful. I say that very sarcastically for those to understand. And so in that new realignment, we're part of it. Our action against Iran, our action against Hezbollah, okay, make us part of it. But to be clear, until we somehow arrive at some kind of resolution, it's not going to be a happily ever after, but a resolution in the Gaza Strip, which includes our 50 hostages and brings about some kind of the end of the fighting there, all new coalitions here in the arena are going to be very impacted by what goes on in Gaza.
So, my last question, as you know, in all our conversations, we always talk about the battle of narratives. So, this time, did you see any significant change during the Israel-Iran conflict? Because the US was involved. So, of course, I generally track the US media. So, US media was not that critical of Israel as it was during, a section of media during like the CNNs and the Washington Post. They were highly critical of Israel and trying to project it as an aggressor, and the main reason for a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which I did not agree with, which especially section of media persons also didn't agree with. But overall, did you see any significant change this time? Because you mentioned earlier in your conversation, on this conversation, that Iran was trying to project itself as a victim, and Israel was being projected as an aggressor. So, one, how do you overall assess the global media coverage? And second, and especially the West. And second, the stance of the Western nations. Let's leave out US. Apart from that, because it is, I would say, my perspective is that Israel is doing basically the job for rest of the Western world, because all of them are fighting, struggling with Islamic jihadism, and state the proxies, which were backed by states like Iran and other Islamic states. So you are the one basically who were on the front line, and so do you see any change in stance of the West, if we compare it with the Israel-Hamas conflict, and now if we compare it in terms of the Israel-Iran conflicts, both in terms of the stand of the Western states as well as the Western media?
I'll start with the narrative in the media, and then I'll go to the issue of the governments. The narrative in the media was different. I'm not going to say it was great, which means that within the context of what Israel did, it was respectful, but it asks questions in a way that is the same framing as in, why did Israel kill civilians in Iran? And I'm like, we did not target a single civilian, not a single one. We targeted all of the different things that I mentioned before, and yet I was getting that same kind of framing. You could have done better. And as I always say, I wish we were perfect. I wish we knew how to say, you're the terrorist, here's the X, and you're the only one who's going to die and nothing else is going to happen. It doesn't work that way. And the flip side of that has been that the usual in Israel were very mean. We're very derogatory about this because we call them the useful idiots, meaning the same ones who support, globalize the intifada and that everything is about from the river, from the sea, Palestine shall be free in the sense that that Israel should not exist. The same ones now are flying Islamic flags. And if they're flying the Islamic regime flags and they are in the free world, you called it the Western world, I'm going to call it the free world, then I really want to say they're not even useful idiots, okay? I almost want to say I'll send them to the Islamic regime of Iran to see what would happen to them there, but I'm not willing to do that because I'm in the free world and you don't do that. So that's on the street. When it comes to the governments, it's a bit different. There is way more understanding of all of the governments, and not all of them, okay, but of the governments worldwide of what you said before, that what Israel has done is taken an action that none of those governments would ever have chosen to do, but the inaction was detrimental. It was allowing Iran to continue to do that. Kind of goes back to what we were saying before about the ceasefire that enables Iran to recuperate a bit. But Iran is a country. I want to remind you that the ceasefire in Iran right now means that more people are going to be showing the destruction of the sites. More, they're going to have to acknowledge what we did. They haven't acknowledged it, or else they're going to have to hide it. And the people in Iran are going to say, what happened? What's happening? Okay, it's so that in the governments, there's much more understanding. I think that the biggest question that's left to the governments in the world and to the Israeli government is how actually effective were the main strikes, Israeli and US, against the nuclear capabilities. That's the question, because what people are saying, if you weren't effective, why do it at all? And I'm like, you never know what your effectiveness is going to be. They dropped an amount of munitions which is inconceivable to us. And if Iran built something that could withstand that, shouldn't that worry the world even more? Shouldn't they isolate them even more? So I'm just putting that out there right now because that's a question, a lot of questions about the decision making. It's going to be a fascinating academic subject, how you make decisions. Do you get everybody together and make are these rational decisions? But that's the academia afterwards. Right now, decision makers, very strong backing from the UK, from Germany, from France, from the United States. And I'm saying these are voices that have been very critical of Israel and actions in the Gaza Strip. And I hear those voices. I don't ignore them. And in this case, they view this as a very different type of threat. And I think that that's an important stage in the ceasefire, because it means that if the Islamic regime in Iran or through the proxies stops the ceasefire, we have understanding that we will continue to act, and it won't be seen in that sense as being, oh, the Israelis again. It's like there's very strong understanding there. As I said, difference between the street, the media, and between the governments.
Thank you, Colonel Eisen. Thank you so much. And our best wishes are with you and Israel. Stay safe, and we'll be back soon with another conversation. And you gave a fantastic perspective as always. And
Thank you so much for inviting me.
no, thank you, and we'll continue to have these perspectives from Colonel Eisen. So if you've liked the video, please share it and like it and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions for Colonel Eisen, you can post it in the YouTube comment box. We'll share with it these questions with her, and we'll try to get some answers also in our next podcast. So thank you so much, Colonel Eisen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ramesh.